already mentioned this at the introduction. Where does the word computer find its origin? It's derived from the verb to compute, which means to calculate. It's also much older than you think. It even existed in the 17th century, although it meant something completely different. It designated a person who made his living making complex calculations. This noun got its current meaning shortly after World War II. But although we use computers now for a multitude of tasks, it basically still does a lot of calculations. Remember, when we examined the file, we saw nothing but numbers. And yes, computers are still very well suited to do calculations, and not only when you're using a spreadsheet. As a matter of fact, you may be assuming that you're moving a mouse across the screen, but actually, behind the curtains, your computer is just crunching numbers. I know that because in the 80s I was programming my own mouse drivers. So yes, your computer can compute the result of 2 plus 7 divided by 3. Let's bring in a calculator. 2 plus 7 divided by 3. 4.3333, that can't be right. Let's add some parentheses there. 3, that's it. Now, let's return to uBasic for it. Yes, you can actually write C equals 2 plus 7 divided by 3, including parentheses. That makes life easier. So if you can use a calculator, you can make an expression in uBasic for it. Isn't that cool? You can even add variables here. Let's assume we previously defined a equals 7. We can now include that variable in our program and alles zal rechtkom. It will render the very same result, since a equals 7. We call this mix of properly applied operators, parentheses, variables and numbers an expression. Okay, you're completely right. We told you what variables are, you probably know what numbers and parentheses are, but what are these operators? Well, there are 6 of them, and we'll explain 5 of them, since you probably know them already. The first is addition, and when you passed elementary school successfully, you probably encountered that one a million times. Its little brother is called subtraction, and this one too has been designated its familiar symbol. The next one is multiplication. Depending where you come from, this one is sometimes designated an X or a dot. But in uBasic, its symbol is a star. And then we have division. Again, depending on where you're coming from, its symbol is either an obelisk or a slash, but in uBasic it's presented by the letter. And finally, exponentiation. Normally this is depicted by a superscript number, but in uBasic its symbol is a caret. Exponentiation means how many times a number is multiplied by itself, so 6 to the power 1 equals 6, and 6 to the power 2 equals 6 multiplied by 6, which results in 36. Now, let's properly define some concepts here. It will make our work a lot easier later on. We already mentioned a number or a variable a number of times. Well, when we mention the word operand, we mean exactly that, a number or a variable. A single operand is a term in itself, but when we speak of a term, we may also mean an additional operator and another operand. So an operand is always a term, but a term is not always a single operand. Just like a cow is always an animal, but not all animals are cows. The same goes for an expression. A single term is always an expression, but an expression is not always a single term. Like a term may combine 2 operands, an expression may combine 2 terms. If you put the result of an expression into a variable, that's called an assignment. uBasic for it will calculate the result of a valid expression and assigns that result to a variable. Talking of terms and expression, you may enclose them by parentheses, just as we saw in our calculator example. Sometimes the order in which expressions are evaluated does not correspond with our intention. You may enclose a term or expression with as many parentheses as you should fit, but there's a catch. The number of opening parentheses must always be equal to the number of closing parentheses. If you don't, you're likely to trigger an error. So this one is okay. There are 5 opening parentheses and 5 closing parentheses. And although this one seems optically correct, it isn't, because it's lacking a closing parenthesis. And that's a wrap. And this is what we learned today. You can do calculations with uBasic Fort. If you can handle a calculator, you're able to write expressions that uBasic Fort understands. These expressions consist of combinations of operators and numbers or variables. You may enclose parts of these expressions or entire expressions by parentheses, as long as the number of opening parentheses exactly equals the number of closing parentheses. If you put the result of an expression into a variable, that's what we call an assignment. And that's the end of the line, folks.